The kingdom of Orelith was known not for its power, nor its riches, but for its sorrowful silence. The capital city, once vibrant with music and colors, now wore a coat of quiet dignity, mirroring its ruler, Crown Prince Sunghoon. Cold winds swept through the marbled corridors of the palace, where laughter once echoed but now only whispered memories remained. He stood at the edge of the northern balcony, silver robes billowing like restless ghosts around him, eyes fixed on the fading horizon. His beauty was undeniable, ethereal, as if carved from snow and moonlight. But those who met his gaze would often look away, chilled by something they couldn't explain. Prince Sunghoon had never smiled, and no one had ever seen him cry. Sunghoon was crowned regent at the age of 16, after his father, the king, fell into a cursed slumber from which he never awoke. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said a goddess cursed the royal bloodline, others whispered of forbidden love and betrayal. Only the inner circle knew the truth. Sunghoon was cursed. As a child, he was afflicted by a divine punishment, one that stole his ability to love. He could not feel it, give it, or receive it. Any sign of affection toward him slowly drained the giver, freezing their emotions into fragile glass until they shattered. His advisors respected him. The people admired his fairness. But they feared him. He was the frozen prince. Far from the palace, in a coastal village surrounded by cliffs and crashing waves, you lived a quiet life. You weren't a noble, nor someone of influence. But you were known for your gentle hands, your ability to heal both wounds and hearts. Orphaned as a child, you were raised by the village healer, taught to read plants and people alike. You laughed often, sang while working, and looked strangers in the eyes with a warmth that made even bitter elders soften. One day, a royal messenger arrived, bearing an invitation you never expected. You had been selected to attend the Spring Ascension Festival at the palace, as a guest healer and advisor on botanical restoration. You didn't know why. You had no connections. But you were curious. And your curiosity would change everything. The palace was breathtaking. But it felt like a museum, grand yet lifeless, beautiful but frozen in time. Your presence didn't go unnoticed. You smiled too easily, asked too many questions, and you walked without the stiffness of those who feared the prince. The first time you saw Sunghoon was in the garden. He was alone, seated beneath a leafless tree, reading a scroll. The moment he lifted his gaze to you, your breath hitched, not out of fear, but recognition. You couldn't explain it, but something about his eyes looked familiar. Not in memory, but in emotion. You bowed. He nodded, curt and practiced. "You are not from the capital," he said, voice smooth but detached. You smiled. "No, Your Highness. I come from the coast, where people talk too much and fear too little." He blinked, clearly surprised by your candid tone. But instead of dismissing you, he said nothing. He watched you. Later, you would learn that was the first time he ever let a stranger speak to him so casually. The festival preparations required collaboration between scholars, healers, and advisors. Despite protest from the royal court, Sunghoon personally assigned you to the palace garden restoration, a place he rarely allowed anyone to touch. Why? He didn't know. Not fully. But something about your voice echoed through him long after you'd left the garden. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, warm. Over the next few days, you kept crossing paths. You found him studying rare herbs in the royal greenhouse. He overheard you calming a palace maid with only a few kind words. You left a wildflower at his usual seat in the garden, unaware that he noticed, and took it. One night, unable to sleep, Sunghoon wandered into the gardens. There, under the moonlight, you were humming softly while tending to the lilies. He watched from a distance. You turned, sensing him, but didn't bow this time. "Can't sleep either." "I do not dream," he replied. You tilted your head. "Do you wish to?" He hesitated. That question, so simple, yet piercing, clung to him like dew on frost. "I don't know what I wish for," he said quietly. "But your voice makes me wonder." You didn't understand the weight of that statement yet. But in that moment, a breeze passed, warm and strange, rustling the garden leaves as if nature itself held its breath. And for the first time in years, Sunghoon felt the faintest sting in his chest. Not pain. Not sorrow. Something else. A crack in the ice. The following days unfolded like petals of an unseen flower, quiet, tentative, and strangely beautiful. You found yourself drawn deeper into the routines of the palace, assisting with the preparation for the Spring Ascension Festival. Yet amidst the politics and perfection of royal life, your world began orbiting around the silent figure of Prince Sunghoon. He didn't seek you out, but he never avoided you either. There was an unspoken awareness between you now, like two souls walking the edges of a shared secret they hadn't named yet. Each time your eyes met, the stillness stretched longer. Each accidental conversation dipped just a little deeper. And while the other guests chatted about politics and power, you found yourself wondering what kind of dreams a prince who couldn't feel might have once had. One afternoon, you brought herbs to the royal greenhouse. The air was thick with sun and scent, vines curling lazily over stone archways. Sunghoon was already there, examining a rare midnight violet, known to bloom only when touched with warmth. The flower refused to open under his hand. He didn't look surprised. "I read it only responds to emotion," he said as you approached. "Joy," you replied gently. "It blooms when it senses joy." He turned to you, quiet. "Then it will never bloom for me." You didn't respond right away. But then, moving slowly, you reached out, not to the flower, but to him. You didn't touch him, not even close. Instead, you simply stood beside him, letting the moment stretch, letting your presence speak what your words could not. The next morning, the violet bloomed. No one mentioned it, but a whisper spread among the palace staff. The prince smiled. It wasn't true, not exactly. But it almost was. And that was enough to unsettle everyone. You, on the other hand, began to feel different. It started with cold fingers in the morning, even when the sun was warm. Then, brief flashes of fog clouding your thoughts. A heaviness in your chest, like snow falling where no snow should be. You brushed it off as fatigue. But late one night, as you rested in the palace library, an elderly maid found you asleep at the desk, your hands rimmed with frost. The next day, a masked seer arrived. She was called the Oracle of Ash, a wandering prophetess whose presence was rare and always met with unease. She requested no audience, no ceremony, only you. In the privacy of a dimly lit chamber, the seer held your hand and frowned. "You've been touched by a curse not meant for you," she said. "He is marked by divine frost. And now, your heart begins to freeze in his place." You stared at her, stunned. "Why me?" "Because you gave him what he's forbidden to feel." The words echoed through you like thunder rolling across still waters. You tried to confront Sunghoon the next day, but he was nowhere to be found. The palace had become colder, literally. Snow flurries drifted through corridors where there should have been sunlight. The lilies in the garden began to wilt, and the violet closed again. You found him at sunset, in the abandoned north wing of the palace. He stood before a tall mirror, its surface covered in frost. You saw his reflection, not as he was, but as a boy, maybe 12 years old, reaching out toward something unseen, eyes wide with longing. When he saw you, he didn't speak. His expression held no surprise. Only a deep, tired sadness. "I didn't want this," he said quietly. "Not again." You stepped closer, heart aching. "You knew." He nodded once. "The curse doesn't stop me from feeling entirely. It stops me from holding on to what I feel. Every moment of warmth slips through me like water. But if someone gives me their love, it poisons them. Slowly, painfully." Tears welled in your eyes, not for yourself, but for him. For the years he'd spent alone. For the way he had accepted this empty fate as if it were his nature, not a punishment. Still, your voice didn't tremble. "Then teach me how to stay, without breaking." He looked at you with disbelief, as if no one had ever offered such a thing. And maybe no one had. Not even once. The frost on the mirror began to melt. Just slightly. The mirror in the north wing cracked 2 days after your confession. Not shattered, but split down the center like a wound. No one noticed it. No one dared enter that part of the palace, not even the guards. But Sunghoon stood before it every night, watching the fracture widen like a timeline that could not hold the weight of its own grief. You had offered to stay, to endure a curse that was never yours. And since then, Something in him had changed. But instead of hope, it awakened fear. Because for the first time in his life, Sunghoon wanted something he knew he could never keep. You, the girl who smiled at ghosts in the garden. The girl who touched flowers with a reverence he couldn't understand. The girl who stood at the edge of his loneliness and didn't run. You were breaking because of him. And the curse, it was accelerating. Each time your eyes lingered on him, frost bloomed on your fingertips. Each time he let your voice stay with him too long, you coughed up a breath that didn't belong in this world. And last night, when your hand brushed his sleeve by accident in the corridor, the skin beneath it bruised into the shape of a dying rose. He didn't speak to you for a full day after that. Not because he was angry, but because he was terrified of what you were becoming. That night, a snowstorm swallowed the palace. Not a natural one. Not like the coastal storms you had grown up with, wild, messy, full of salt and rain. This was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of snow that falls in dreams where something is always just out of reach. You found Sunghoon again in the garden, kneeling beside the frozen violet. The bloom had closed completely, covered in a thin layer of ice. He looked up when you approached, and something in his expression fractured. Not because he saw you, but because he knew you still hadn't turned away. "You shouldn't be near me," he said, voice barely audible beneath the wind. "You're dying a little more each day." "I know." "Then why?" His voice cracked. He turned his head sharply, as if trying to swallow the ache in his throat. "Why do you stay?" You knelt beside him, close enough to feel the cold rising from his skin. "Because no one ever stayed for me," you said. "And I won't let you become the curse they made you believe you are." Silence. Then, slowly, his hands curled into fists. You could see him fighting something inside, emotion pressing against walls he had built for years, trying to break through the dam before it drowned him. "I feel it now," he whispered. "Every time you look at me, every time you speak, I feel something tear inside my chest. And it hurts. I don't know if it's love or something else. But I know this." He finally turned to you, and his voice shattered. "If I let myself love you, you will die. And I will never survive that." Your heart broke, not from fear, but from the agony in his voice. The desperation of someone who had been alone too long to know how to hold on without destroying what he held. But even in that moment, you didn't step away. You touched the violet, the one he could never awaken. And though your fingers ached from the frost, it bloomed beneath your hand. "I'm not afraid of pain," you said softly. "I'm only afraid of never being loved at all." That night, the oracle returned. She summoned you in silence. Her face, once unreadable, was now drawn with grief. She held a mirror carved from obsidian, a divine relic that showed not the future, but the price of it. In the mirror, you saw yourself lying beneath the same leafless tree where you first met Sunghoon. Petals drifted around you like snow, but your skin was pale. Your chest didn't rise. The curse would not take you violently. It would take you gently, quietly, in the way winter steals flowers that bloom too soon. The oracle said nothing more. She didn't need to. You knew what you had to do. At dawn, you left the palace. No farewell. No letter. Just absence. The moment Sunghoon woke, he felt it. Not just in the cold, but in the hollow silence that now screamed through the garden, louder than any storm. He searched the halls like a man possessed. Called your name into wind that didn't carry it back. When he returned to the garden, the violet had wilted into ash. And in that moment, something in him snapped. He dropped to his knees and cried, for the first time in his life. The snow didn't stop falling. But the sky cracked open just a little, like the mirror in the north wing. They found him in the chapel of forgotten kings, a place buried so deep within the palace that even time seemed to avoid it. Sunghoon knelt beneath the stained glass windows, his hands stained with frost, his voice raw from calling your name into silence. You had vanished, and with you, the last light left in him. The palace grew colder in your absence. Not just in air, but in spirit. Servants fell ill with a strange numbness. Paintings faded. The fountains froze solid, even under the sun. And worst of all, Sunghoon stopped speaking. Not out of pride, but out of despair. There were no more words left to keep him human. But somewhere, buried beneath the ice, he still felt you. And that feeling, however dangerous, became his final anchor. One night, a visitor came uninvited. Not a servant. Not the oracle. But a god. Or at least, what remained of one. The deity who had cursed Sunghoon when he was just a boy appeared at the threshold of the garden. Cloaked in twilight and crowned with broken stars, it looked almost gentle until it spoke. You are remembering her too deeply. That was not the plan. Sunghoon faced it without bowing. Why did you curse me? The god tilted its head. Because you were born with too much heart. It stepped closer. The snow around its feet melted instantly. You are the last of a bloodline that could have changed fate itself. So I took your feeling before it could grow dangerous. Sunghoon clenched his fists. And what happens now? You are beginning to feel again. She is your anchor. But if you want her back, the god smiled, slow and cruel, you will have to give me what you have left. My soul. No. Worse. The wind held its breath. Your love. You, meanwhile, had fled to the farthest edge of the kingdom. A coastal village where snow had never touched, where fireflies still danced in fields of tall grass. But even there, the cold followed. Your hands no longer warmed beneath the sun. You no longer dreamed without pain. Each day away from him made you lighter, like your body was becoming air, like you were vanishing thread by thread. And still, you didn't regret it. You had loved him. Fully. Freely. Even knowing what it would cost. But as you sat alone one evening beneath a withering sky, you felt something strange, warmth. Faint, hesitant, like a memory knocking on the door of your bones. You turned, and there he was. Sunghoon. But different. He looked the same, but something behind his eyes was gone. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply stood before you and said, I came to return something. And then he held out a flower. The violet. Whole. Blooming. I gave it to the god, he said. My love. Every trace of it. Every piece of you I carried. I gave it all away. Tears burned in your eyes as he placed the flower in your hand. I can't feel anything now, he said. Not sorrow. Not joy. Not you. But you can live. Your lips trembled. Why would you do that? He looked at you, hollow and radiant, like a star that had burned out beautifully. Because I'd rather never feel again than watch you fade because of me. The flower bloomed brighter in your hands. The frost in your veins melted, slow and painful. And Sunghoon. He turned to leave. You called after him. Screamed. But he didn't stop. He couldn't hear your voice anymore. Not because he didn't want to. Because he wasn't allowed to. That night, as you wept with a violet clutched to your chest, a single snowflake landed on your shoulder, then melted into light. And from somewhere distant, a single memory remained in your heart. A whisper. A warmth. A name. Sunghoon. Weeks passed. Then months. Seasons blurred into one another like brushstrokes on a canvas of silence. The palace thawed, but it never truly warmed. Spring came late that year, cautious and half-hearted, as though nature itself mourned the memory of a love that never had a chance to fully bloom. Sunghoon ruled beside his father now. He moved with grace, precision, and nobility, but no longer with passion. He smiled when expected. He spoke when required. But there was an absence behind his eyes, as if the soul that once danced quietly behind them had vanished. He didn't remember you fully. Not the way he once had. He knew your name. He knew your presence. But he had forgotten the way your laughter lingered in his chest. He didn't remember how your voice used to anchor him when the nights grew too long. And he couldn't feel the ache that once made him human. But you remembered everything. And you had chosen to stay. Not out of duty. Not out of guilt. But out of a love that asked for nothing but the chance to exist beside him, even if unseen. You returned to the palace not as a lover, but as a companion. A quiet soul in the background of his life, never asking for more than the simple grace of being near him. You walked beside him in the garden, now blooming again. You read beside him in the library. You tended to the violet he no longer noticed. And still, you never stopped hoping. Not for a miracle. Not for magic. But for something slower. Softer. Real. You hoped that maybe, just maybe, love could grow again the way it first began, unnoticed. Rooted in kindness. Fed by time. One afternoon, as the sun sank low behind the palace towers, you sat with him beneath the old tree, the same one where you'd first met. The branches had begun to bloom, fragile pink petals brushing against the wind like lost memories. He turned to you then, slowly. No grand expression. No sudden epiphany. Just a glance. And a quiet question. Have we ever watched the stars together? Your heart paused. You nodded. Once. He looked up. Let's do it again. You said nothing. Only leaned back, eyes toward the coming night. Above, the first star appeared, a small, stubborn light. He didn't remember the love you once shared. But for the first time in months, he stayed beside you. No guards. No titles. No pretense. Just two people. One who had forgotten. One who still remembered. And between them, a bittersweet hope that maybe, someday, he'd remember what it meant to feel again. The end. Or maybe, the beginning.